Sailors people working at sea, what's the creepiest or most amazing sight you witnessed? Oftentimes in the Navy, I'd stand on the fantail and watch the ocean. Once we had hundreds, probably around 400 dolphins riding the carrier's wake. They followed us for 3 days. In the middle of the Pacific, it's so dark and there's so little light pollution. You can see reds, browns, and faint blues of gas clouds in the star's cape. Another time, I was watching the water at night. They say it draws you in, and it really does. You look at this pitch black void, with only the wake or turbulence of the water catching light, and intrusive thoughts of jumping in just naturally occur. It's mesmerizing, especially if you're alone. At night during one of these events, I saw blue glowing water, what I now know was bioluminescent algae. And inside this rather massive patch of blue glowing water were squid that appeared to be maybe 15 to 20 foot long. You could catch their outline by the light from the water. I stared at what was multiple squid passing by for minutes, what seemed like an eternity, and then the light started going away in the spot I was staring. There was still a lot of glowing water, we weren't headed out of it, but this patch gets darker and darker and darker until pitch black. A solid 15 seconds of intense curiosity. Suddenly a lot of turbulence, and a whale surfaces. It had snatched up all the squid. The whale cocked to one side and looked at the ship, and our eyes met, I want to think. It studied the ship for a moment, until just sinking back down until the glow of the water masked it completely. Story 2. The Northern Lights in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. We were anchored in a remote cove, so the CO agreed to turn off all the exterior lights. Just a crazy thing to see. Story 3. Giant spears plunging in and out of the sea. In the Gulf of Alaska, I have seen some crap. But one of the most terror-inspiring things I've seen are what can happen with some of the loose logs from the logging trade. Sometimes when a big log gets loose from a raft, it becomes partially waterlogged, and floats, small, end up. So you have this 4-foot diameter telephone pole in the sea, sticking up 40 feet into the air. No biggie, shows up on radar and easy to spot. Now give that pole 20 years of floating around or so. It rots in such a way that it becomes sharpened to a perfect point by wind and wave and looks quite menacing. Now put it in a gale with 25-foot waves, 50 feet trough to peak, and it becomes a towering spike of death that shoots up from the sea every 15 to 20 minutes. Out of nowhere, 60 feet into the air, only to plunge down into the dark depths, waiting to skewer some unsuspecting boat in a few minutes when it thrusts out of the ocean again. It is a genuinely terrifying sight. Rare, but not so rare that I haven't seen 2 in one season. It's like the spiked junk of Neptune looking for an opportunity to duck your crap up in a particularly terrifying way. Story 4. Fresh out of college, I got a job in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or so they said, as an architect designing whatever. Ended up doing oil rigs, and one beautiful morning there were sharks going under the main platform like always, but there were 2 dead sharks. Next morning, 3 new dead, then 4 the next day. Then a steady 4 or 5 a day for a week or 2. They would float up under the sea through deck that looked much like a metal colander. Crew would have to punch them down so the current could catch them with a large pole. What made it really weird was they looked like they had heart attacks or died in their sleep. No marks or bites or anything. The guys on the rig had all kinds of theories. Then one morning, while in a room that was completely submerged and had a beautiful view as we sat in a meeting, everyone got to see the reason the sharks were dying, like viewing it on a movie screen. This octopus had made itself a home between the base and the deck. A shark was swimming by in a cruising fashion, and we see these tentacles grab it right in front of the glass and snap it like a glow stick. The marine biologist smiled and said, "Octopus is literally doing that to entertain themselves, like because he can." The marine biologist lowered a dive camera, and this octopus was huge. The crew would joke about it thereafter. People would smoke on the deck at night, and people would say, "Don't let the octopus in." Seeing those tentacles was just insane for their length, and to think about how a shark is mostly muscle, and the octopus would just snap them was kind of scary. Story 5. In the pitch black of night, in the middle of the vast emptiness of the sea, you see the stars filling the heavens, and more shooting stars than you would expect streaking to the earth with their fiery tails. As your eye draws down to the water, you find that somehow the ocean is darker and emptier than the sky. Your eyes strain for a glimpse of anything, but ultimately, you only catch glimpses of strange and mysterious creatures lithely swimming just beneath the surface, occasionally peeking above the surface or triggering flashes of the bioluminescence that disappear as suddenly as they appear. Story 6. Was on watch and a lookout reported a ship on fire on the horizon. Looked through my bingos and saw what they were looking at. Looked like a plume of flame really far away, just over the line of the horizon. Went and consulted the astro books and discovered that it was actually moonrise. The tip of the crescent was coming up over the astronomical horizon and was bright red-orange, still very cool. I've also seen the Flying Dutchman illusion. Dolphins swimming through bioluminescent waters that looked like glowing torpedoes, meteor hits near the ship, lightning hitting the mast, waterspouts in the Caribbean, and the green flash at sunset. Many more things as well. Being at sea is just plain trippy. Story 7. I was engineer and first mate on a converted LCM-80, LCM-8 in the fish trade. We operated in the Gulf of Alaska, Prince William Sound, and Bristol Bay fisheries as a tender, taking salmon and herring from smaller boats and villages in for processing on land. We had a regular spool windlass on the back, and for some reason the company thought this made us equipped to tow a 220-foot barge from Whittier up through the Aleutian Islands at False Pass and around to Bristol Bay and back each year. The Gulf of Alaska can be a cruel place sometimes, and at 4 knots max speed towing the barge, we got caught in a doozy. We tried sheltering behind an island. I can't remember, we were working our way up the Aleutian Peninsula, but even so we're unable to hold against the wind and got pulled out. The little windlass on the back deck was getting pulled off and ripping a hole in the engine room in the process. Eventually, in 25-foot seas, we let go the barge and just tracked it and followed it on radar, figuring we'd recover it when things calmed down in a few days. In the horrific days that followed, during which I must have vomited twice my body weight, we nearly got rolled once and took on about 10,000 gallons of water in one of our compartments. So, good times. On the last really bad night, I was on watch in the wheelhouse while the captain slept. About 3 a.m., and we were rolling 33 to 37 degrees, losing 2 knots against the gale by the Loran. Yes, it was a while ago. With the barge popping in and out on radar, about 4 miles in our lee. Suddenly, the whole ship reverberated and shook with a thunderous boom, and I was sure we were done. We'd obviously hit something hard. I woke the captain and the deckhand, our entire crew, 15 minutes later. Still no sign of flooding in any compartments or other alarms, but I noticed the Loran lost signal, and I wasn't having any luck on the SSB trying to call in for a possible rescue. Yeah, right. The deck lights wouldn't come on, and we had a couple of popped breakers in the nav lights. After a while, it became obvious we weren't sinking, so we went about our watches just keeping an eye on things. At first light, I roped off and went on deck to see WTF. And then I saw what had happened. The WW2 surplus LCM-80, Vietnam-era LCM-8, I misremembered that, had a deck house at bulwark level and a pilot house and stateroom built above that. So the roof of the pilot house was a good 25 feet above the water. Mounted to the steel of the pilot house was a 4-inch steel pipe that went up a few feet to a 3-inch steel crossmember, forming a large T on which our radio and navigation antennas, as well as our mast lights, were mounted. It was gone, the whole thing, bent over at 90 degrees and broken off as if by the hand of God himself. Also gone were the life rafts, which were also mounted on the roof structure. The massive 4-inch steel mast had been bent over and torn off. It wasn't like it was corroded and just broke. There was obviously massive force involved, and even the reinforced steel plate of the mast step on the cabin roof was distorted. It took us about a week, but eventually the seas abated and we were able to bring the barge in under tow to the shelter of the peninsula once again. We made the next 1,000 miles without much except flat seas and beautiful vistas. Such is the life of the mariner. When we eventually got into Dillingham, everyone was quite surprised, as we had been declared lost at sea, and the Coast Guard had already given up the search days before. Both our life rafts had been found empty with their expires deployed, and we were all assumed dead. I still have no idea what monstrous thing must have reached out of the sea and broken off that mast, but whatever it was, inches away from taking out the wheelhouse, where I was blindly staring out into the rain-tortured darkness on that night. Crap still haunts me. Some things I remembered wrong. LCM-8, not 80-75 feet long with the mods it had. Vietnam era, not WW2. Set up with a full-height engine room, 2 871 diesels, 1 371 genset, 2 471 genset. Deck house at gunwale level with galley, head, shower, and double stateroom. Above that, a pilot house with captain's stateroom. Decked over with tanks and reefer system for fish hauling Story 8 in the USCG. Was in the Eastern Pacific in February 2017. The bioluminescence at night was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Sailing the Caribbean, you get the glittering speckles in your wake, but in this water, the stern wake glowed very bright, almost made it pointless to be running darkened ship. The bioluminescence was so much so that even fish in the water activated. I remember a ghostly glowing cloud silently move in toward us, where we were taking it all in on the fantail. Then, just as silently, it moved away. We could see larger glowing clouds, likely a school of fish, then a glowing streak, maybe tuna or something, come flying in to the glowing mass and the school would explode like fireworks underwater. Saw this occur a few times. It was amazing. Another time we were in the Caribbean, middle of the night at flight quarters. I was on the fire party and we were staged on the forecastle. We were kind of bored waiting for the helicopter come back. All of a sudden, this massive meteor hurtles by overhead, completely turning night into day for a second. We were all in disbelief. The people wearing NVGs were a little ticked, though. Story 9 was standing topside watch on a dark night when the sky suddenly turned bright. For about 3 seconds, something was incoming that lit all the weather decks up like daylight. This sparked quite a reaction on the bridge and in operations. We were forward deployed during wartime, although not in a region where active fighting was expected. For a moment, people scrambled, fearing we had been targeted for a surprise missile attack. Then the sky went dark again, just as suddenly as it had began, leaving us safe and alone again. Yet there was still a whole bunch of commotion on comms as people jabbered stuff that amounted to Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. The only crew member who saw what had really happened was me. "It's a meteor! It's a meteor! It's a meteor!" Had to repeat the report several times before anyone paid attention. A meteor had come down almost directly above us, then broken up into 3 pieces as it burned up in the atmosphere. It was like a fireball. That put on quite a light show in the ocean on a moonless night at dark 30 in the middle of expletive nowhere. Astronomers call these bolides. It might even have been a super bolide, but it isn't on the list of recorded super bolides. We may have been the only ship that saw it. Based on the time of year and the location, it may have been one of the southern Taurids, a meteor shower that's noted for producing fireballs. Not a whole lot of people ever witness a meteor that spectacular. By lucky coincidence, I got a good view of this one. Story 10. Green bioluminescent algae outside the coast of South Korea. Plenty of bald eagles and whales in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Dolphins in the Mediterranean Sea and flying fish in the Indian Ocean. Starry nights without light pollution, lots of shooting stars, and occasionally the Milky Way is visible. Story 11. I used to work on an Atlantic salmon farm a few miles out to sea. Best job I ever had. Creepy. We were round at the second site, other side of the island to the main site, and this one was being left fallow for a couple years, so just required some maintenance every now and then / was used for storage. Me and my brother were there late afternoon to check some ropes or moorings or something, I can't remember, when all of a sudden there was this really strong electrical / copper smell, and the place went silent. It was flat calm, relatively clear skies, so it wasn't a thunderstorm coming. For some reason, this smell really freaked us both out, and we both felt like we were being watched by something, and there was a kind of strange feeling / atmosphere to the place where it just seemed off. After a couple minutes, it went away and the atmosphere returned to normal. We were pretty glad to get back to the main site, but never experienced anything like that again. Really weird. Awesome. This one is hard to describe, but sometimes we would have to pull super long 18 to 20-hour shifts at harvest time. This involves starting sometimes at 2 a.m. and working until late in the evening. There wasn't actually loads of work the whole time to do. We just needed to be present for a lot of it and lift a cage net once an hour or so. So we mostly just stood around drinking coffee and talking bollocks. Anyway, I digress. We were starting out one of these mornings in the speedboat, heading out to the site on a really crisp winter night. Not a breath of wind, super cloudless sky, and a hint of aurora above us. Speeding along into the night with my buddies in this beautiful scenery, nice fancy survival suits on to keep warm. I remember looking up and seeing a huge sky full of stars, and a shooting star burning across the sky out towards the horizon. As I say, I can't really bring it to words, but I've never really felt more alive or happy in my work than that night. Story 12. You know the feeling of being in a full stadium? 10,000s of people all within sight of each other, all together? Multiply that by 100 and maybe that would be like the sea of sea mammals I was in the middle of, presumably on a bunch of food below, squid or something. There were half a dozen species of dolphin and half a dozen species of whales all together, going completely crazy, busting the surface white. Hundreds of thousands, I'm guessing. Going into the forecastle of the small 42-foot lobster boat was like entering a different reality. Through the hull, you could hear. They were all talking to one another, and I could say you could hear them, but it was something else entirely. Rest of my body were vibrating at every frequency, heard and sub, and supersonic alike in alien rhythms and repeating pattern. A once-in-a-lifetime sensation lasted about half an hour. Highly recommended. Story 13. Intrusive thoughts of jumping in. I used to work on a yacht, and when I was on night watch, I had this thought constantly. I thought it was super messed up, but now that I see this comment, I'm happy I'm not the only one. Story 14. I sometimes work on a fishing boat during the summers for a bit of extra cash. And here's a few of my stories that you might be looking for. Keep in mind that some of them are dark. 1. The floater. Whilst fishing during the night, we heard something hit the boat. Now, of course, sometimes it's just some wildlife that couldn't see it in the dark, but we still went to look. I shone a flashlight into the water, only to see a person's body, face up, floating there. Needless to say, I freaked the duck out and nearly dropped the light. We reported it. Authorities came. We never found out what happened, but the theory we had was it was related to some sort of sinking due to the life jacket they had on. 2. The fox. This one's not so scary, freaky, or dark. We were fishing close to an island and saw something orange in the water. Now, my buddy thought it was just garbage until it moved its head up. Turns out it was a fox. It came close to the boat, and I grabbed it and brought it aboard. Poor thing must have been treading water for ages because it fell asleep in my arm. We released it on land after it had woken up. 3. Palatine sighting. Giving away where I live here, but in the area, there's a legend about a ghost ship known as the Palatine, otherwise known as the Countess Augusta or Princess Augusta. It's stated that the ship's burning mass can sometimes still be seen, and this is called the Palatine Light. We were out fishing. It was cold. We were all miserable. Then a buddy of mine calls out that he sees another ship, and we turn. There in the cold, we all swear that we see a ship aflame. We try to just chalk it up to the cold, messing with our minds. Story 15. Last deployment. Russian fighter jets flying right above us. Taking photos was pretty unsettling. Then, on SIPR share drive, we saw the photos of the Russians taking photos of us, and it's literally some dude in the back of the jet with a Casio. Story 16. Creepiest would be underway on 31st October/Halloween Day, off maybe 15 miles off the coast of Florida, near Miami. Lookout sight's a white houseboat, looks like it's just drifting. So we get closer on our fast response cutter, 154 feet, to make contact with them. Nothing, no one responded, used radio, loud hailer, and ship's whistle. So captain said, let's launch our small boat and go investigate. During the small boat mission brief, I reminded everyone that it's Halloween Day, and this looks just like a horror movie storyline. So the boat launches and the crew gets on board. The doors are closed, but lucky open so the crew can investigate. The boarding team slow conducts its safety sweep while looking any crew on board. So here's a houseboat floating on the ocean with no land in sight, abandoned. So the boarding team marked the vessel with spray paint and left it. Houseboat is probably in Europe, if it didn't succumb to the relentless sea. Another time in the middle of the night between midnight and 3 a.m., we start tracking a target of interest. We clearly see someone and at least 2 others on a cabin cruiser. The vessel is unlit, which is a red flag and steady speed. So we follow it and decide to launch the small boat for pursuit once they're close to U.S. territorial seas. We run our small boat with lights off as well and have night vision goggles to help us see them. I pull up with 15 to 20 feet of the vessel and flip the blue lights and spotlight on them. No one is on the boat. All we see is a boat, no one standing up behind the helm or on deck. So I creep up closer, then all of a sudden we see arm hanging over the gunnel. The boarding team starts yelling, show us your hands and stand up. No one moved, they were laying on top of each other. So we get the boarding team on board and start checking boat for safety. We transferred all of the 26 migrants off the 35-foot boat on the fast response cutter, 154 feet. Story 17. My dad was competing in a marlin fishing comp near Weipa, the pointy top bit of Australia. Battled a fish for 4 hours, they catch and release. As it neared the boat, crew ready to haul it on board, and a camera team went in for the tight shot, hanging right over the edge. The marlin breached the water, and then a huge great white shark breached under it, full length above the water, inches from the crew's faces. Shark took the whole marlin, plus a big bite out of the boat, all caught on camera. Everyone was pretty shaken for a while after. I'll never forget the pics of the bite mark, exactly like people do to crackers, with individual tooth marks, but a meter plus wide. Story 18. I worked on a ferry that crossed a river. 3-minute trip, but a somewhat remote location. I worked alone from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all year. In the winter, the darkness was profound. Some mornings I'd show up in the complete darkness. You couldn't see lights from houses or street lights. And it was only as the sky got lighter did you realize you were so fogged in that the end of the boat was even hazy. Some mornings in the spring when the spiders were going nuts building their webs, and there would be webs all over the cabin door, the gates, the boat, that hadn't been there and I left the night before. From the cold morning dew or fog, there would be water droplets frozen all over them. When I would break a web to get past it, they would fall quickly to the ground and make a clinking sound from all the particles of ice. One time I saw needle ice, where blades of ice grow straight out of the ground. I pulled onto the gravel parking pad in the morning and saw the needle ice in the dirt. Actually started the ferry late. It was fascinating to look at. I switched to a different boat, and my shift was 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. I remember having a very vivid dream one night about a deer with huge antlers standing on the end of the ferry in the dark, light by the streetlight. 3 nights later, I actually saw that deer. It wasn't on the boat, it was up and back further, but it was like in a movie, completely silent, just me and the deer, the whole world dropping away. When spring thaw happened or huge storms came through, the river would get really high. The boat was attached to an underwater cable, so it wouldn't float away and couldn't go off course, but you could feel the water pushing so hard against it. The current would push the boat as well as the cable downstream that you'd feel the boat struggle to come in for the landing. You'd land and immediately slide back off, or you'd look upstream and a huge 100+ long tree with branches and roots attached would be floating at high speed right toward you. If you was in the middle of the river at the time, you'd have to brace against the controls and wait for the tree to hit either the boat or the cables. Hitting the ferry was easier. You could rock yourself free and move past it. When a tree, especially the root ball, hit the cable, you were screwed. It would tangle in the cable and you couldn't move forward. If you went back to the shore you came from, the cable would be pulled so far, your landings would be messed up, and it would take 2 hours at least for a crew to come down, get in the dinghy with a chainsaw and break the tree up. So you'd call it in, but then you'd steer to boat out to the tree and ram it at full speed, back up and ram it again, and again and again and again. The whole time hoping that whoever tied the cable down to the shore did a damn good job. You could feel the intense pressure on the cable as you backed up and rammed the tree again. Once, I had 2 cars on board and a car waiting on the other side. It took 20 minutes of ramming the tree for enough branches and roots to break off and float away. Another time, a tree slid past the cable, but I didn't see it, and pushed it toward the landing under the apron of the boat. I couldn't land. There was a 12-diameter tree trunk between me and the landing, tangled in the weeds, the cable, the boat, all of it. I couldn't get close enough to let cars on or off. I was stuck. It took hours for a crew to come down and free me. Once, the power cut out while I was in the middle of the river. We were powered from an overhead line with a long extension cord, only 8 inches thick, running between the boat and the power. When you died in the middle, the only option was to move the ferry with the rescue boat. This was a tiny aluminum boat with an outboard motor. It sat attached to the ferry, hanging over the water. You'd lower it into the water, start it up, and the tiny outboard motor would eventually move the 40-ton boat toward shore, very, very slowly. It took over an hour, with passengers on board. Story 19. Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into her side. We was coming back from the island of Tinian to Leyte. We just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about a half hour. Tiger, 13-footer. You know how you know that in the water? You can tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was that our bomb mission was so secret, no distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us overdue for a week. Very first light, sharks come cruising by, so we formed ourselves into tight groups. It was sort of like you see in the calendars, you know, the infantry squares in the old calendars, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was the shark come to the nearest man. That man, he starts pounding and hollering, and sometimes that shark, he go away, but sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark looks right at you, right into your eyes. And the thing about a shark is, and he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't even seem to be living till he bites you, and those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and despite all your pounding and your hollering, those sharks come in and they rip you to pieces. You know, by the end of that first dawn, lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks there were, maybe 1,000. I do know how my many men, they averaged 6 an hour. Thursday morning, I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson from Cleveland, baseball player, bosun's mate. I thought he was asleep. I reached over to wake him up. He bobbed up, down in the water. He was like a kind of top, upended. Well, he'd been bitten in half below the waist. At noon on the 5th day, a Lockheed Ventura swung in low and he spotted us. A young pilot, he spotted us, and a few hours later, a big old fat PBY come down and started to pick us up. You know, that was the time I was most frightened, waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. So 1,100 men went into the water. 316 men come out. The sharks took the rest. June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. Story 20. Wild things can happen below deck. The engineering spaces are full of their own stories. I was a mechanic on the USS Enterprise for several years. We conducted periodic maintenance on heat exchangers, which meant we opened them up to pull out gunk, hydrolance the tubes, and replace zinc oxide discs. When we did this on the main condenser, we'd find sea life in various conditions: chopped up fish, crabs, shrimp, and pieces of unidentified animals. One time we pulled out several larger chunks that we assembled on a workbench. It was a 4-foot porbeagle shark. It truly smelled awful, and our chiefs made us throw it overboard. We had a few games to keep ourselves entertained. We had a running war against the other mechanics with slingshot, threw oily rags, ambushed then from the bilge, held bilge regattas for handcrafted boats, etc. The most risky game was called Danger Nut. You'd take a nut, fastener, slide it down to the base of a screwdriver, then spin it using low-pressure air. Once it was spinning, you'd wing the LP air valve open, and the nut would fly off the end of the screwdriver, bouncing off metal engine room equipment. Nobody usually got hit, but a little danger did wake you up on the 0200 to 0700 watch. On rare occasion, we'd stop in the open ocean for a swim call, an event that was more trouble than it was worth. We'd line up in the hangar bay, jump off one of the aircraft elevators, and we're supposed to swim to the fantail to climb back on board. The problem was that a lot of sailors in the US Navy can't swim. People would start floating off away from the ship and had to be collected by a small boat. We were hundreds of miles from shore. Like others have mentioned, the ocean is pitch black at night. If anyone fell overboard, you'd better hope the few watchstanders were awake and paying attention, or nobody would ever know. But that made nighttime the right time to dispose of items we couldn't otherwise. Someone pushed the aircrew's goddamn hot dog cart overboard and the XO lost his damn mind. I still laugh about that crap. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. Story 21. I was a quartermaster, and when I was in the Pacific, I saw a completely clear night one time. I saw the Milky Way split the sky and I could see its reflection in the water. The sight was so beautiful it brought me to tears. Story 22. Once, when I was on a cruise, the hat I was wearing blew off my head and landed perfectly on the head of a random girl that happened to be standing about 10 feet behind me. Certainly not creepy, but I thought it was pretty amazing. Story 23. The most amazing thing I've seen is watching the mountains in the sunrise while pulling into port in Norway. That was the moment I realized I was actually living. I don't think I'll see anything as majestic until I go back to Norway. Just beautiful. Story 24. This was in the late 70s. We were in the South Atlantic near Antarctica on an oceanographic research boat, middle of nowhere, and hadn't seen another ship in 2 weeks. A calm day with fog here and there. So we were sounding the foghorn as required. Not a pleasant experience on the bridge, as your ears get blasted every 60 seconds. I was on the wheel when the mate said, "Whoa, look at that." Out of a fog bank about 500 yards away, a two-masted topsail schooner suddenly appeared sailing opposite our course. All sails up and no one on deck, and absolutely no image on radar. We tried hailing on the radio, but no answer. She ghosted into another fog bank and away from sight. It was one of those things that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. The Flying Dutchman was the consensus of the bridge watch. Story 25. Huge numbers of dolphins in a line, shoulder to shoulder, working forward, presumably driving a school of fish. It was like seeing a Roman legion marching to battle. I generally love seeing dolphins, but there was something quite daunting and slightly scary about seeing them work together in such a business-like way. Story 26. Not a sailor, neither was my dad, but my dad was fishing and had a baby whale come up to his boat and bumped it a few times. That video is probably the most insane thing I've seen. Story 27. Standing on a carrier's fantail at night. The bioluminescent algae was sometimes bright enough at night, it provided normal level light if you were right at the lifelines. You'll never see the stars like we have. There are so many faint stars that just can't make it through the light pollution. It was a mesmerizing collage of twinkling lights. There was almost more starlight than black space. They were in such plethora. Once, while smoking in an exterior smoking area on the starboard side, I exited the ship's hull to see we were cruising about 25 knots over glass-smooth water. No waves, no ripples, but our wake. This is actually a bad omen, as the opposite of fair winds and following seas is no wind, which left ye old sail ships motionless. Later that day, we had an emergency diesel generator fail and almost explode during routine testing. Once while on watch in the engine room, I heard the high-pitched echoes of what sounded like someone pinging us with sonar. A while later, I heard the same sound in a much lower octave. I'm almost certain it was a whale close enough to us that I could hear it through the hull, as the engine room interior is under the waterline. A carrier truly defines her own path through the sea. We sailed straight through a high-powered typhoon. The waves attempted in all their might to splash over the fantail. Hangar bay doors were closed for safety because you could see the horizon rocking up and down 30 degrees. Extra overboard watches were posted, and all I felt was the ocean rocking me to sleep in my rack. No matter how small, cramped, smelly, or loud my rack and berthing may have been, that was and shall always be the best night's sleep I ever had. It was always a good day when you saw seagulls, as your next port of call was close at hand. Story 28. It may sound simple, but being in the middle of the ocean at night and being on a Navy ship means no exterior lighting. You can touch your own face and never see your hand. That's freaky. And then you start thinking about how you're just surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean on all sides. That gets pretty freaky. Story 29. I don't have any stories, but I just read this whole thread. What is it about sailors that makes you guys into master storytellers? The pictures you paint with words are amazing and beautiful and terrifying. And I doubt that the authors have degrees in English composition. Bravo. Story 30. I went diving in the Galapagos Islands, and it was like being in a parallel universe. Marine iguanas, 6 feet long, swimming up with you to the water's surface. Baby seals dancing with you and bopping you on the head. Little penguins bubbling while zipping around you like a Disney movie. Birds landing on your head when you're bobbing in the water. The immense guilt I feel for what we have done to animals over the span of human existence. They are so inherently pure and wonderful. I cried a lot on that trip. So beautiful and so sad we ducked it all up. Story 31. The first time I saw noctilucent clouds. I had no idea what I was looking at. It was surreal. Also, bioluminescent algae that makes a big glowing jet behind the boat. Then there was the time I had 2 Black Hawk helicopters fly under the bridge I was currently under at 3 a.m. I can't imagine that was sanctioned by their company. Story 32. Stationed on a cruiser during Operation Desert Shield, we were working 12 on and 12 off shifts. Me and a shipmate would lay on the fantail in the morning with one of the deck hatches open, the red lights shining out. We had a stereo back there and would blast the doors while hearing rush of water over the hull. It was really surreal as the sun would come up over the Persian Gulf, seeing the water like glass reflecting the sun as it rose. That will always stay with me. Story 33. I was night kayaking in the bay. It was around 3 to 4 a.m. and it was a beautiful pitch black night, and I was watching the neon lights from the waterfront taverns and grills. Out of nowhere, I started hearing this sound like radio or walkie-talkie static. It was soft at first, then very loud, then soft again. I sat up to look for a boat that might be sneaking up on me, but there was nothing. I slowly laid back down again, and the sound started up. It was like the radio noise from the video game Silent Hill. Suddenly there were 2 of them, one to the back of my kayak, another off to the starboard right side. The sounds kept varying in intensity. Sometimes they were directed at me, but then they would shift and I could feel the noise in other places. I started hearing the occasional click mixed in with the static. I was freaking out. I grabbed my paddle and was quietly looking around, trying to figure out what was making the noise, when a form raised up out of the water. It looks like a smooth rock or pillar. I could barely see it because of the darkness, but it almost looked like a giant's fingertips sticking up out of the water. Slowly, all around me, more of them surfaced. I was surrounded. The static intensified. All of these things were aiming their hissing, clicking static at me, and it almost hurt. I could even feel it on my skin at times. I stared at the one closest to me, about to whack it with my paddle, when I just made out an eye. It was familiar. I'd seen that kind of eye before. At this point, I realized what the pillars were. They were dolphins. A whole pod of dolphins had snuck up on me and were checking me out. Their heads were poking straight up out of the water, and they were peeking over the edge of my kayak to see me. In my relief, I said aloud, "Oh, you're dolphins." And immediately they stopped hitting me with the static and started making whistles and clicks instead. We hung out for a while. A few even jumped around and played as I watched. They are a lot bigger than I've been led to believe. I thought dolphins were human-sized. These things were cow-sized, but they seemed friendly. After a while, I headed back to the harbor and they followed me the whole way, even jumping ahead of me and guiding me in. I eventually discovered that the pod was well known and that they regularly harassed the local shrimping fleet, pulling open their nets and stealing the shrimp. I've even watched them do it on occasion. Those are some fat dolphins. Story 34. I spent my naval career in the shipyard, assisting with refueling the reactors on an aircraft carrier as a power plant chemist, nuclear machinist's mate, and radio gold controls tech/supervisor. One of the amazing things, I got an up-close view of old fuel rods being pulled out of a reactor vessel and new ones being lowered into it. Honestly, really cool. And from what I've heard, refueling a carrier is the most complex engineering challenge the military faces. It is a crazy process from a logistics standpoint. One of the saddest, not sure if it's necessarily creepy things, a 30-something-year veteran of the shipyard made the choice to do a confined space entry the wrong way, alone towards the end of the day, without fall protection, and he fell and died in a void space in one of our reactor plants. He didn't pass immediately, so someone heard him initially screaming for help. They told someone, and we all had to go down and search the bilges. They found his body within the hour and had to rig him out of the void and then use a crane to lift him out of the plant. He was only a couple of years away from retirement. Story 35. Flying fish jumping through the netting between the hulls and cheese grating themselves all over the trimaran, bar racing catamarans in the Gulf of Mexico, and the water turning purple as far as I could see from billions of jellyfish. Story 36. My favorite sight was in the summertime, off the northern coast of Iceland. The sun was up for my whole midnight to 4 watch that required I sit on the bow with a pair of bingos looking for obstructions. There was a slight chill, so I brought up a thermos of hot tea. However, the wind was completely absent. The sea was glass flat all morning as I stared mostly at the beautiful cliffs on the mainland. Early on, some ripples started appearing, then black figures. I realized they were mother minke whales with calves. I must have seen 100 that morning, something I'll never forget. As far as freaky goes, middle of the night, a group of approximately 6 of us were on the bridge of a ship in the Atlantic. Closest land was hundreds of miles away. All of us saw a green flash go up, then back down onto the water, probably 2 to 3 miles off the port side. We never were able to figure out what it was. Story 37. I was a new deck officer still in training on board an exploration ship. The officer of the deck was visiting, augmenting officer from a similar ship. So I had to stay on the bridge to help them handle some of the particular oddities of our ship, even though I was still getting seasick back then. It was the night watch, and I horribly sick and curled up on the floor of the head bathroom in the back corner of the bridge. The officer of the deck must have thought I'd gone completely crazy because they'd hear me vomit my guts out, flush the toilet, then start laughing with joy and wonder. The toilet's flush with seawater, and we were going through a patch of bioluminescence. Every time I threw up and then flushed the toilet in the pitch-black little room, the bioluminescent organisms would flash, making an amazing fireworks show in the toilet bowl. Story 38. I worked on a fishing trawler and seen some crazy stuff, but the most interesting was there was a pod of whales with their young calves, and for 4 hours they were following us, slapping the water and breaching. We thought I was an amazing sight to see for so long of a duration of time. Then we realized there were 4 or so killer whales chasing them, trying to get the young ones the way they hunt. It's crazy to watch. Story 39. I was a Coast Guardsman and worked on a cutter based in Southern California right out of basic training. We were headed north and happened to be alongside an enormous migration of dolphins. I mean, they went as far as the horizon. It's not something I could ever explain to someone. Even showing them a video couldn't express the sense of scale. Story 40. I saw a dead whale once, out in the middle of the Pacific, just bobbing along and getting slowly taken apart by sea life. We thought it was a sperm whale, but it's hard to tell when it's half gone. We got to see a lot more fish and a few whitetail sharks in the area. A dead whale seems to bring the sea to life. Story 41. When I was in high school, my dad bought a sailboat, Pearson 323, in South Florida. We hopped on it and sailed it across the Gulf of Mexico for a few days to get it up to the Panhandle. Got up one morning and we were in a thick fog. Couldn't see more than 40 feet off the boat. I heard this low hum in the fog. Sounded really creepy and pretty unnerving. Turns out it was a weather buoy. We also had an old hobbies cat that we'd sail around on. It had 2 trampolines joined at the middle. Me and Dad sailed almost the length of St. George's Island, and coming back was almost completely becalmed. Dad didn't want to ditch the boat somewhere random on the island, so we're heading back at barely 1/2 knot. Couldn't see them but heard dolphins surfacing around us. Then one of the dolphins surfaces right in the middle of the 2 hulls and sprayed Dad in the ass. I was dying laughing. Story 42. Standing off the fantail in the pitch black of night when a lightning storm cracks off. It looked like somebody flipped the lights off and on repeatedly. Quick flashes of ocean as far as the eye can see, then back to black. Then back down 4 decks to sleep in a small box. Sailors stacked 3 high, Story 43, oil platforms, North Sea, amazing northern lights. About 100 miles off of Angola. A school of hundreds of bluefin tuna. Gulf of Mexico, several times during some ominous-looking storms that weren't bad enough to evacuate for. Incredibly large waterspouts is Story 44. Did time in the Navy and fishing boats off of SoCal. I've seen the dolphins, whales, sharks, giant squid. Watch out for that beak, it will take your fingers off. Lots of flying fish, bioluminescence from the beach and in the ship's wake. The stars at night, 4 aircraft carriers all right next to each other for a photo op, and where the international date line crosses the equator. It's all water, but the GPS readout was cool. The creepiest damn thing was the thousands and thousands of sea snakes in the Persian and Arabian Gulfs. Apparently they are very poisonous, but have a small bite and would need to get you between the index finger and thumb. Still didn't make anyone feel better about falling in. Story 45. Once I was on bow lookout duty in a place called the Minch in the Celtic Sea. There was a really bright light like a spotlight pointed straight down that was moving across the horizon, and then it changed direction and flew directly overhead, illuminating me and the shop. Directly below it, it passed overhead, totally silent. There was a faintly greenish hue in it, and nobody had any idea what it was. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, and I was pretty shook, as was the MOW. This was July 2015. Story 46. The sunsets/sunrises are the best you will ever see. Some sailors will talk about the green flash once the sun sets. Never believed it, always thought it was a sea story until I saw it myself. There are lots and lots of birds that end up on the ship. No matter how hard you try to save them, they inevitably die. Watching the stars, though, NVGs is amazing too. The creepiest incident was when a friend and I were talking on the flight deck at night after our helicopter shut down. We were both looking into the port hello hangar, and I saw a shadow run out of a gear locker and into the wall. I thought to myself, that was weird, and wasn't going to mention it. However, my friend said, "Did you just see that shadow?" I agreed, and we walked to the locker to see if anyone was there. No one was around. We tried to recreate it by walking where other people on the flight deck were, and couldn't duplicate it. Story 47. I was in transit to the outer edges of the Great Barrier Reef, and the only one awake on the boat, as it was my watch. The sun had already fallen below the horizon, and as the light was fading, all of a sudden, the horizon caught fire. A glowing red vista appeared to extend thousands of feet in the air. As we regularly passed bulk gas carriers, I could only assume that one of these had exploded just over the horizon. For about 30 seconds, the entire skyline glowed like a fire, casting long shadows across the water. The bridge was bathed in an eerie reddish-orange glow that started fading as soon as it started. Not knowing what I'd just seen, I woke the captain to see if we should report what we saw. When I explained the situation, he merely scowled at me and said it was a rare phenomenon that he had seen many years ago around the same time of year, and that it was the light from the sun reflecting of the moon that had not yet risen. A truly mesmerizing experience. Absolutely worth the remaining 7 days of the captain's wrath for waking him. Story 48. Offshore. Heard a mayday call, boat taking on water. Coordinates were garbled and no response when asked for repeat. Maybe 15 minutes later, another boat called out a capsized boat. It was nearby, so we motored over to provide assistance. Around the capsize was all kinds of floating debris that indicates it was fresh. Coolers, snacks, cushions, etc. No sign of life. Coast Guard C-130 even joined to look. We found out in the evening once we were home that another boat had been nearby. Rescued the folks immediately and ran in. I guess they didn't have comms as CG was not aware either for at least a couple hours. Not great when you're 50 plus miles out. Story 49. I have a fishing spot that I surf cast from at night. There's a history of ships being broken up on the shoreline and Revolutionary era sinking and such. Some nights I swear I can hear people speaking behind me, but there's never anyone there. Story 50. For anyone who watches Wicked Tuna, one of the guys, Paul, many moons ago was my dad's stern man. One day they're out, and a mako shark breaches so high it almost landed in the boat on Paul. We all still have some teeth dispersed amongst the family. Story 51. Stationed on a U.S. Navy ship from 2019 to late 2022. Most night when I wanted to see the stars and we were in the Pacific Ocean, I would go outside at midships and you would see almost every star. During the evenings, I would do the same, and I've never seen sunsets as good as being out on the open ocean. During one of our abandoned ship drills, I just so happened to look over the side and saw a 9-foot hammerhead shark. While I do miss being out on the water, I don't miss being on a ship. Story 52. I once had a Kings Point third assistant engineer admit they didn't know something and that they were wrong. To this day, in all my years sailing around the world, that was the single most amazing thing that ever happened on a ship. None of my seafaring friends believe me when I tell them, but I swear to you it happened just once, but it happened. Story 53. Minor thing compared to some of the stories in here, but one thing that has stuck with me was the first gale I got caught in. Seeing a wave towering over your head, looking for all the world like it will crush you, only to pop up and over at the last moment, something else. Story 54. So I was on the Vincent coming into Dubai back in 2014/201515 10-month deployment, and a sandstorm hit right as we were coming in. It delayed us for the morning, but was really cool to see. It felt like we were on Mars. The sun was dim, everything was red. The sea changed to a dark, murky color. They didn't close the hangar bay doors soon enough, and you could see the sand float and settle on the aircraft. It was pretty crazy. Story 55. When I was in the Navy, I saw a basketball go floating by in the middle of the ocean. Actually, after typing that, I realized it was neither creepy or amazing. Story 56. Growing up and still to this day, my mother is a travel agent specializing in cruises. On a cruise ship, it's hard to find a quiet, secluded place with little in the way of light pollution. Before everything was fitted with cameras, it was pretty easy to get to the bow of the ship or pretty close to it, depended on the ship. Two things come to mind: seeing storms out on the horizon or in between, how high the clouds get, how angry the sky can look. The moon. Depending on the time of year and what phase the moon was in and what time of night, it felt so low you could pluck it out of the sky and it paves a shimmering road of diamonds on the waves to the horizon. Combine any of that with the hypnotic lapping of waves and wind and a warm, muggy breeze, I could stay for hours and never say a word. Story 57. Off the Chesapeake, somewhere near Solomon's Island, in the 1970s, we were traveling off a 47-foot twin-engine pleasure cruiser when the radar picked up a shallow where they shouldn't be any. It reflected like a sandbar, so we cut the engines and slowed the duck down. When we passed over it, it showed the shallows were about 10 feet out in the middle on the bay and must have been about 25 to 30 feet across. So we circled back to see if we could see it through the water, if it was just a huge school of fish, or Chessie or what. It was a huge, pulsing, frost-white, translucent jellyfish, or sea nettle, as the locals called them. Looking it up, they are called moon jellies now. Normally, they have bells about 6 inches or a foot tops, but this was enormous. We thought it was a nettle raft, a phenomenon when a bunch of them get stuck together in a nettle bloom. But this was a single bell with a clearly outlined white rim and clover pattern, just pulsing. It was much like a large plastic bag, like the pulsing started in one area and took a second or two to reach the other. The top surfaced for a moment, then slowly folded to its side and went sideways and down. It was mesmerizing. We circled it a few times before it vanished into the murky water, so we knew it was only slightly smaller than our hull. The tentacles were so long behind it, we left before it ended. They humped to the surface and then down to follow the bell for a good 10 minutes without losing density, like some clear ramen. Inside the massive tentacles were bits of half-digested fish, crabs, and assorted trash. Story 58. Not a sailor, but out at sea with my dad one night, and it went eerily calm. The wind died down, everything went silent, and the water went completely still. Not a ripple or other disturbance in sight. Just went completely glassy and reflected the sky perfectly. It would have felt like we were floating in space, but for a few clouds drifting above. As if that wasn't creepy enough. Shortly after, a small ferry that we'd already seen approaching in the distance got closer and eventually passed us. Lights on in every window, not a soul in sight. Not one. We couldn't even hear the boat itself make any noise at all, despite being not more than 500 feet from us, and with no other sound around. My dad and I talk about it all the time. We just can't explain what we saw. Story 59. Dad and I were on a trip on our 19-foot open boat that we camped out on for a week. One night, we anchored in a cove for the night and woke up in the morning to a few killer whales just swimming around in circles around us. They stuck around for a good while, just swimming and then left. Story 60. I'm a sailor and dive master. One of the creepiest things I've seen was whilst sailing way offshore about 5 years ago. I noticed something weird in the water off the starboard bow and get out the bingos to check it out. It was a group of dolphins, about 8 or 10 of them, all in a circle with their heads out of the water facing each other, bodies and tails completely vertical underneath them. Looked like they were having a goddamn business meeting out in the blue water. It was so bizarre. We were completely under sail and, as such, very quiet. We came within about 10 meters of them when they noticed us. They disappeared. TF were they doing out there like that? Every time I meet a marine mammal expert, marine biologist, I explain the story and ask, no answers yet? Can also agree with the sensation of being called into the void when alone on night watch. Sometimes I whisper into the wind, and the wind whispers back. It's strange. Most amazing, well, there are several amazing things I've been lucky enough to see. Most recently, I ended a dive, and when I came up to the surface, it was right next to a mother and calf humpback whale. The visibility was so bad, we couldn't see them underwater at all, but the baby started breaching right in front of our faces. It was incredible. Story 61. My uncle was a North Sea fisherman for decades, sailing out of the North Netherlands through a very shallow coastal sea called the Waddenzee. They'd been trawling for brown shrimp north of the islands and returned through one of the straits between the islands very early morning, light just breaking. As they sailed past one of the many sandbanks, his colleagues spotted an odd shape. At first they thought it was a group of seals, but as they got closer they realized it was a life mako shark that had become stranded in a shallow pool due to the low tide. He took a picture and there's no mistaking the shape and size of the thing. It must have been at least 3 meters long. I suppose for most Americans or Aussies, that is nothing that special. But the Waddenzee is basically a pond when it comes to sharks and whales. Even common dolphins are rare, as it is so shallow. They reported the sighting over radio, and the local preservation society came out to have a look. But the tide was already coming in, and it was not seen again. Story 62. On an 8-day fishing trip in the middle of nowhere in Mexican waters about 150 miles offshore. It's 2 a.m. and I'm the only one up steering the vessel when a red laser pointer lights up my chest and goes up to my face. It freaked me out and I checked radar, and there was no vessels on the map. Still no idea who or how that happened. Story 63. I've come across barely floating containers a couple times. One was filled with Chinese shoes that were trash because of the time at sea, and others seemed to be documents or books of some sort. Still waiting for a jackpot, or to hit one at night and die. Story 64. French Navy navigator here. A few years back, went underway from Toulon on a high-sea patrol ship for a routine patrol. The sea was very rough out of the roadstead coming from the west, which was completely contradictory with what our weather briefs were indicating. Captain decided to go ahead nonetheless. We took a heading towards the east to enter Hires Bay. When we entered in the pass, crap went down. I was outside starboard wing of the bridge to take bearings when the ship took a 35 degrees list on starboard. If I had held my arm out, it would have been underwater. I held on the compass for dear life because going overboard in that weather would have probably meant death. Needless to say, I figuratively shat myself. When the ship leveled, my boss went out to check if I was still there and ordered me to go below to check how bad the damage was to some of our gear. I went, and when I was at the main deck, the ship took a 43 degrees list to starboard. I was then blessed with the horrific sight of a washing machine that was strapped in a room by the hull on port side punch a hole through a light bulkhead and go straight to starboard without touching the deck. Also, a lot of the firefighting equipment, axes, hoses, pumps, was just flying all over the place, with guys from the security department desperately trying to catch it and fasten it. At that point, we had entered the bay and had better weather, We had lost electricity in the bridge and CIC, so the captain decided to wait in the bay for the weather to calm down. When it did the next day, we pulled back into port for repairs. This little escapade resulted in a few bruises, the electrical network of the bridge, and CIC being badly damaged. The guys that were supposed to strap crap down didn't do it correctly and got punished. And for me, a reminder of my mortality. On a more positive note, I once saw a stork land on our 100mm turret after a sandstorm off Libya and stay there for several hours. Also, we had a couple of sperm whales with a calf swimming alongside for almost a day off Ivory Coast. When you see that kind of stuff, it doesn't matter if you are 3 months in or 20 years in, you feel like a kid again. Story 65. When I was aboard the USS Truxtun, CGN-35, we got called down to Haiti and had to cross the ditch. It was actually quite amazing crossing the canal. Once we got to the other side and on our way to Cuba and Haiti, we spotted this little tiny boat in the middle of nowhere. Water as far as the eye could see in all directions. So we stopped to investigate. And sure enough, there were 3 fishermen on board who looked like they wouldn't have lasted another day. And we took them aboard and sank their boat. They were all near death, but still alive. Had we not come along when we did, and had we not spotted them, they were goners for sure. They were just day tripper fishermen, but their motor had conked out, and they had been adrift for days, being carried further and further away from any land. Story 66. USN. The sky at night breathed unimaginable beauty. The sounds and smell of the Atlantic Ocean while it makes your hair dry and sticky. And then the vastness of it, like dark blue, but no, I cannot describe the color. It was like deep, dark, mysterious blue you never seen before. Hunting but beautiful, like it's calling you. And I'm like, yeah, too creepy, I'm heading inside. Story 67. I have a few. I worked on the small boats at Riverine Squadron 2 while in the Navy and before the merger with Mobile Security. My deployments were to the Arabian Gulf, and that's where these took place. 1. The water really can get as calm as glass. Remember the waterfall scene from Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End? It's like that. During the day, from sky to boot, and 360 degrees all around, there's just the color blue. No other boats, no waves, no birds, nothing. It's a bit disorienting because the horizon almost entirely vanishes. At night, the reflection of the stars is breathtaking, as there's no feeling comparable to floating with your brothers through space. 2. At night, if you can get low enough to where the bow meets the water, you can see a turquoise shimmering from the microscopic bioluminescent creatures in the wake. It's as though the boat is activating a blue-green glitter as it traverses the water's surface. 3. On the way back from an escort mission one night, we got bored and decided to stare at the night sky with night vision goggles to see if we could spot any UFOs. What we saw instead was a far richer picture of the stars. Think 2 to 3 times as many. It seems obvious now that NVGs would enhance the infrared energy of the stars we couldn't see and make them visible, but we weren't expecting that outcome at the time. Now I'm just grateful that I've seen more of Mother Nature than most ever will. The Navy has been, by far, my best and worst job. Story 68. I spent some time at sea when I was in the Navy, and it was my favorite part of my service. I'd sneak out onto the weather deck for a cigarette before the sun came up. You're out on the ocean, with no artificial lights except for the few on the ship itself, so it's an unrelenting dark on overcast days. But on clear days, you can see just so many stars. It makes you realize how incredibly small you are, and it's humbling. Sometimes we'd churn up bioluminescent plankton, so the wake along the sides of the ship would just light up in shades of blue and green. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. We also had dolphins play in the wake and race alongside the ship, sometimes dozens of them. And during underway replenishment, you could see turtles and tons of fish in the water between the ships, hanging out in case we dropped something. Story 69. Creepy. Just going up on aft deck at midnight to do soundings and not being able to see anything at all beyond the deck. It's like you're traveling through complete darkness. Amazing. So far, Northern Lights. Story 70. Not working, but blue water cruising. We'd left Nassau heading for Spanish Wells on our 23-foot go-fast after some shady characters tried to steal our boat while we were on it. I was nervous, afraid they'd come after us to get the boat. We'd gone a good ways when I started hearing a strange noise over the engine sounds, but there was nothing on the horizon behind us. I was sure it was them. What else could it be? I made sure the guns were within reach, even though my BF wasn't worried at all. Somewhere off Rose Island, he shut off the engine and hopped over the side to clean the hull. I was really uncomfortable with this, but he was gonna do what he was gonna do. So he's over the side and under the boat when I hear the strange sound again. I'm looking all over, trying to figure out where the pirates are, when I see a disturbance in the water behind us. It's far away, but it's getting closer. I'm confused and alarmed. The wannabe pirates were scary, but the unknown is scarier. I lean over the gunwale and bang on the hull to get my BF's attention. He surfaces and I'm screaming, "Get in the boat! Get in the boat!" He boards and now we're both trying to figure out what's coming. And then it becomes clear that it's a small whale, or a giant dolphin, I don't know, but I'm calling it a whale. So we waited as it beelined right for us. When it caught up, it rubbed against the starboard side of the boat with its back out of the water. It was about the same length as the boat, and its back was covered in propeller scars. My BF wanted to get in to swim with it, like an idiot, but fortunately, reason prevailed. The whale investigated the boat thoroughly for about 15 minutes and then swam around us for a while, before continuing to wherever whales go. We waited till it was out of sight before moving on to Spanish Wells, where we had a super weird night at the yacht haven. But that's another story. Story 71. South of Sweden on a 28-feet yacht under motor, as there was no wind. We hadn't picked up that there was a fog bank we were about to motor into until a ship's horn let loose, seemingly just a few meters away. We just about shat ourselves as we raced to get a radar reflector out before we were run down. We never even saw the ship. On another trip in a 100-year-old Norwegian sailing ship, I was having breakfast in the main cabin after doing a night watch during a storm. I suddenly found myself underwater. A fellow crewmate across the table from me wasn't underwater, so I stood up and dived across the table. It turned out we were hit by a rogue, which spit the hatch above where we were eating, and I was under a 1 meter by 6 meter flow of water. Lots of other stuff was also broken, but luckily, we were just a couple of hours from our destination. Story 72. Two things. 1. Rainbow at night. After heavy rain, when the sky was finally cleared, the light of the full moon created a full rainbow. My watchman, who was sailing for 20 years, had never seen anything like this. 2. Because of the constant time zone changes, I saw a full moon while the sun was still up. They were both at the same height, but one was on the port side of the vessel and the other on the starboard side. Story 73. Worked a few months on Great Lakes. One trip we saw a wooden, maybe steel ship, the sails and flags. Naturally, we pulled out our phones to record it. Our hailing went unheard. The ship disappeared into mist/fog that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Our recordings, all of them, showed empty water, same with pictures. We more or less agree we saw the Flying Dutchman, but puzzled that it was on the Great Lakes. Story 74. Creepy. Sailors have very deep traditions and many beliefs. A lot of us believe that most ships have lost souls on board. Souls of those who died on board while the ship is in the middle of the ocean, where they have nowhere to go, so they stay. When I was a cadet, I took bridge watch with the chief officer. It was 7 p.m., and we were sailing to our next port. He was updating some inventory on the bridge computer, and I was standing on the hallway in front of his desk, in view to the rest of the bridge. I just embarked about a week from that night, and was not yet familiar with how things are done. While I was talking to him, I saw a tall guy wearing all white walk into the bridge bathroom. Our company uses white coveralls for officers, and our electrician was the only officer who could be this tall. So I asked the CO, why is the electrician still working at that time? He looked at me all confused and said that engineers only work till 5 p.m. on a normal day. I walked over to peek the bathroom, and there was no one there. I swear I saw something walk into that room. I have many more stories, but most of them are amazing rather than creepy. It's a different bond you get between man and the sea. It's lonely but peaceful, dark but enlightening. Story 75. About 2 years ago now, I was on a tug making a tow across the Gulf of Mexico. One morning, the water was incredibly calm, looked like a mirror to the sky, and looked beautiful with the sunset. Suddenly, we were surrounded by what I initially thought were thousands of plastic bags. I looked closer and realized they were all man-of-war jellyfish. It was an incredible sight. I wish I took a picture, but I just ended up taking it all in. I've also seen the crew of the ISS enter the atmosphere and fly overhead on their way to Cape Canaveral. Story 76. Several. The green flash. Right as the sun is setting on the horizon, there's a phenomena that is half color distortion and half optical illusion, but it produces this flash of green light from the sun. It's difficult at best to see. After 20 years in, I think I saw it twice. The smells on an aircraft carrier because it's a literal city with an airport on top of it. If you work the flight deck, you are accosted by numerous sights, sounds, and smells. JP5, exhaust, rubber, cooking on the non-skid, but there are vents from the levels below. And sometimes, you can be standing in the most industrial place in the world, surrounded by jet fuel and burning rubber, only to catch a whiff of freshly baked bread. Flying fish. One person mentioned standing on the fantail, which is great for dolphins, but some of the other port or starboard sponsons give a closer look at the water, and to see dozens of flying fish erupt from the water and swoop across its surface is breathtaking. Punta Arenas. I took the GW from Norfolk to Japan to replace the Kitty Hawk. We passed through the straits at the tip of South America, and going through the area near this tiny town, the snow-capped mountains, the untouched wonder of it was something to behold. I will never forget standing on the flight deck, taking it in as long as I live. Those are just a handful of the memories I have, but the most amazing, the people. Seeing strangers come together and work towards a common goal, especially when it's something like humanitarian aid or relief. Those are the times I will never forget. Story 77. Navy. I always loved watching the stars at night. No light pollution. I'd go out and smoke a cigarette or cigar, sometimes with a buddy, and sometimes alone. Just talk for hours, since there was not much else to do. I'd also look out into the waves/water. If it was pitch black, you couldn't see much. But the smell and spray of the ocean was relaxing. It was loud, so it kind of blocked out other noises most of the time. I'd bring out my camping chair and sit after a long work today, 12 to 18 hours, and just stare, either into the black void of the ocean or into the eternal night sky. I'd try and track a light and see where it went or what it did. Your eyes like to play tricks on you. Sometimes I thought I'd see something, like a star that blinks out and never comes back, or something moves in a way it shouldn't. There's a lot to look at when you can see the whole Milky Way, and you've got nothing but time. Story 78. Last year, my husband and I were in Cancun, and one night we wandered down to the beach to perch on some rocks, share drinks, and talk. We were looking out at the sea. Then I noticed a strange red glow out towards the horizon, like red and unreal looking. I immediately pointed it out, thinking it was lights on a ship maybe, but the glow kept getting bigger. I'm guessing between the drinks and my imagination, it seemed like the glow was coming into shore. We sat watching, mesmerized, wondering what it could be. Of course, my mind ran in a million directions, from aliens to deep-sea humanoid populations coming to observe us terrestrials. Eventually, the glow cleared the horizon, and it turns out it was the moon. It looked blood red for a while and lightened up eventually. Strangely beautiful. Story 79. One night on a hatch, we were moored on the lee side of a small pillar of an island. It's 3 a.m., and for some reason I snap awake. Something is wrong. Took me a few seconds to realize what was up, but the boat wasn't moving, wasn't even rocking. Did we run aground? Did we hit the cliff or something? So up on deck, about half the other people aboard are also awake, also thinking something was wrong, standing about. What's happened is we'd hit a patch of dead calm. The ocean was as flat as a mirror, and so still the stars wrapped around underneath us. It was the only time I've ever seen anything so stunning in my life. It was like we were in space itself. We watched quietly for a while and went back to bed. Story 80. A Russian sub surfacing less than 100 yards off our starboard side in the middle of the North Atlantic while we traveling at 20 knots. It hung around for 20 minutes and dove again. Never saw her again. Story 81. One day I got out of the pit after evening rotation and got out to the deck. It was a perfectly calm night, and all the lights were off. No clouds in the sky, and it was a new moon. And I looked out on the ocean, still as glass, with only the ripple of our wake underneath where I stood, and saw the night sky, unadulterated by light pollution for the first time, and it took my breath away. It was spectacular, in a fashion I have never seen before. Majestic, humbling, magical. And looking down, perfectly reflected, was the sky below me, sailing on a sea of night and starlight. I remember it sometimes and cry, because I don't think I'll ever see anything as beautiful again. Story 82. While stationed on a carrier at night in the complete darkness of the Persian Gulf, I thought it was a bit eerie/creepy watching the orange glow in the sky above Kuwait from oil wells burning out of control. Story 83. Serving submariner here. Not weird or anything, but seeing the stars in the night sky in the middle of the ocean with no light pollution for the first time absolutely blew my mind. It's beautiful. Story 84. I was once a sailor stationed in Puerto Rico. There was an island, Vieques, that had a bioluminescent bay. I once sat on the beach at night all by myself and watched dolphins leaping out of the water. Every time they did, the water would light up and glow where they splashed. It was the most amazing moment of my life. It was sacred. Sailors who have spent nights out on the water, what's the sketchiest encounter you've had out there in the dark? Story 1. The actual dark. It is pitch black out in the middle of the ocean. That can be quite unnerving. On the upside, on cloudless nights, the night sky is breathtaking. Story 2. When you're in the middle of the ocean and realize that if you got dumped in the water, it is likely that no one would even notice you missing for a while, and it's a big ducking ocean to go looking in for one guy. Story 3. 50-odd miles offshore on a sailboat, pitch black. Suddenly we hear a loud crack, and the boat shifts an inch to port. Then silence for 20 minutes, followed by another loud thump and boat shutter. Made our way quickly back to the coast. In dry dock, there was a 2-foot diameter dent in the hull. I'm guessing a sleeping whale. Story 4. Not really an encounter, but we had a man overboard at 2 a.m., 8 days into a 21-day sail from the Galapagos to Polynesia. Really heavy weather and couldn't snuff out parasail, and someone came forward without being clipped on and got knocked overboard. Took us about 25 minutes to get them back on board and 3 hours to sort out the lines, etc. In terms of encounters, huge groups of luminous jellyfish are pretty weird to see at night. Curious whales/dolphins are really cool. Probably the sketchiest is coming close to container ships during the night. Those things don't change course unless it's essential. Story 5. I heard what I'm assuming is a whale breaching while it was pitch dark. It'd be cool if I could see it, but at night when I have no idea what's out there, It was kind of spooky. Sounded like a lot of water shifting around and big splashes in the dark. I don't see what else it could have been. Story 6. Out at sea at night, no moon, pitch black. I'm talking shooting the crap with a shipmate, and out of nowhere, whap, the loudest slap I have ever heard. My buddy literally screams, WWTF, of flying fish right in the face. That was 40 years ago. I'm still laughing. Story 7. Full disclosure, this is not directly sailing related, but I am a sailor and have a creepy nighttime ocean experience to share. While guiding a night dive once, we had a massive female 7-gill shark follow us for the whole dive, just occasionally coming into our visibility before darting off. She was probably just curious of our lights or maybe using them to hunt, but it was just really unnerving to know she was around but unable to see her. That being said, I love sharks, and she did us no harm. They're usually super chill and not to be feared, but you can't help but respect any predator bigger than you are, who while it follows you around in the dark. Story 8. 2 situations. 1. I was on a tanker somewhere in the middle of Indian Ocean. Graveyard watch, fairly good weather, good visibility. I notice a lighthouse light ahead of me. Looks far, but it is very distinct. Flashes rhythmically, quite bright. I check the radar. Nothing. I check the chart. Nothing for at least 400 miles. I continue to observe until it just stops abruptly. Freaked me out a bit. 2. Waters near Philippines. Quiet watch. Few fishing boats in the area. Suddenly, I notice a very faint light dead ahead of me. Looks very far. Nothing on radar. Can barely see it. I thought I have some time until it shows up on radar, but something was telling me to alter course to starboard. So I did, and 1 minute after the alteration, I was passing a tiny fishing boat by about 200 meters with one guy with a crafty torch on board. If I didn't act on my instinct, I would have ran him over. Story 9. I was on board the USS Reuben James in 2012. I was standing watch in combat and decided to take a smoke break on the starboard side windbreak at 3 a.m. It was cloudy, so almost pitch black. I had gone down at this time on many occasions, and there are usually 1 or 2 other people up that late going out for a smoke break. When I got out there, I could see nothing but the cherry of someone else's cigarette. I faced outward and leaned on the brake and lit my Camel Gold and asked how his night was going, having no idea who I was speaking to, but figuring I would find out when I heard his voice / description of his night. I got no response. I turned around to see if he had heard me, and with my eyes adjusted, I would have been able to make him out leaning against the steel wall. As I turned around, the moon cracked out from the clouds and slightly illuminated the small, confined area I was in, and the only 2 directions anyone could have walked away. There was no one there. I was alone. I had seen the cigarette and the exhale of smoke from someone on that windbreak, but no one was there. And no one could have left the smoke deck without my hearing or seeing them. I don't believe in ghosts or the afterlife or any of that nonsense, but needless to say, I didn't stick around outside for long. Story 10. Coming through a part of the Mediterranean with a lot of oil platforms, at night I was Khan, one of the other ensigns was Jude, and our navigator was OOD. Nav ducked into the chart room, so it was just me and the Jude when we saw what looked like another oil platform on the horizon. Only it wasn't showing up on either of our radars. It wasn't on the chart, and the laser rangefinder wasn't working. So the 2 of us are watching this thing get closer and closer, and we were about to call the captain up to the bridge. Jude had just picked up the phone, when Nav walks back into the pilot house, takes one look at the 2 of us freaking out and goes, "You guys know that's the moon, right?" The quartermasters left that one out of the deck log. Story 11. Sailing just a couple miles off the Norwegian coast in an old 14-foot dinghy all by my lonesome. Well, sailing is the wrong word. I was drifting in near zero wind, barely making a knot of headway. That's why I was still out there. I had planned to spend the night on a small island, but getting there took forever, and it got pitch dark. No matter, I was safe enough, and it was kind of nice to have the nighttime ocean all to myself, not a ship in sight anywhere. I had oars and could have rowed to my destination in an hour or so, but didn't feel like there was any need to hurry. Had left the outboard motor ashore because of hunting laws against shooting from a motorized vessel, and I was going after migrating geese. At my position, it was calm and quiet, but all around the horizon, I saw flashes of lightning so far off that I heard no thunder. As I relaxed and enjoyed the quiet spectacle of distant lightning, all of a sudden, I heard someone or something draw a labored breath right next to me. It was unmistakably the sound of breathing, like from a half-strangled person taking a deep breath of much-needed air. Not gonna lie, I briefly panicked before I realized it had to be some marine mammal surfacing for air close to my boat, guessing it was a harbor porpoise, as they are common here, but I never saw it in the darkness. Heard it again a few times, sounded like it moved further away, and there may have been more than one based on the frequency. Of course, sound carries far at night, but it really did sound like that initial breath was right behind me, close enough to touch. Shortly after the breathing sounds disappeared, the wind picked up out of nowhere, and I had to scramble to adjust rigging. Made it to the correct island, and made landfall about 20 minutes later, having gone from idly drifting on the current to skipping over the waves in a few heartbeats. I guess that distant storm dropped by to say hello. Story 12. Underway. Early March in a snowstorm. Well east of Cape Cod. Moderate seas and ship is rocking pretty good. We lose power and go beam to the seas. Except for emergency lighting, which was not much because our battle lanterns were garbage, and personal mini-mag lights. It's dark as hell at times. The worst part? You could hear the creaks and groans of the ship. It was intensified when the ship would take longer than normal to right itself. It made the ship seem much older than it was. At times like those, I would say to myself, should have went to college, dip crap. Story 13. Scariest thing that ever happens to me was in port. I was a sailor on the USS Carr, stationed in Norfolk. There was a shipmate who had gotten himself in trouble and was being kicked out of the Navy. He was not allowed to leave the ship. I saw him on Friday carrying weights out of the ship's gym. Odd, but I didn't pay much mind. I had to come in for duty the next day and he had vanished overnight. We searched the entire ship from top to bottom 3 times over, no sign of him. We found out later he tied the weight from the gym to his feet and jumped overboard the night before. He washed up 3 weeks later when his corpse detached from the weight and floated to the surface. Story 14. While I was on 31st MEU, one night at like 0100, I walked down the starboard outside gangway that runs from the marine maintenance shops to the gym on the starboard side. It's about 150 feet long, and since we were in blackout conditions, it was pitch black outside. About 2/3 of the way down, there was this quiz part of the defense system that sticks out off the gangway so the hand rope cuts out through there. As soon as I let go of the rope to grab the wall on the opposite side, the ship, which was in otherwise calm, flat water, decided to suddenly drop 10 feet as if it ran across another ship's wake. As I struggled to hold on, I swear I could feel something pulling me, almost as the ship suddenly rocked 45 degrees and I was getting shaken off like water on a dog. Once it recovered and I got my footing, it was back to flat, calm water. I blindly scrambled as fast as I could to the end, got inside, and no one knew what bump I was talking about. Mind you, this is a several hundred-ton warship and home to thousands. If there was chop, we'd know. Nevertheless, I took the interior passages after that. Story 15. Not a night encounter, but still sketchy. October 1986, early morning, 7:30, steaming on the rum line from the Cape Cod Canal to Mount. Desert rocks skirting Matinicus. It was dungeon-thick fog. Visibility about 200 yards. No radar, so we were steaming along at 5 knots. All of a sudden, my depth sounder showed a shoal below us at 140 feet. We were in 600 plus foot depth water according to the charts. I'm in a panic in the wheelhouse, trying to figure out how we could be so far off course to be in 140 feet water. This was before GPS. We were getting sat-nav fixes every 30 minutes. About 2 minutes later, the sounds of hovering helicopters was on both sides of us. Vietnam vet, Marine Corps, Air Wing. I know what a chopper at low altitude sound like. After a few minutes, the choppers lifted and went forward of us. My depth sounder had returned to 600 plus depth. I am standing in the wheelhouse, scratching my head, trying to figure out what the hell was going on when the fog lifted. Ahead of us was a carrier battle group. Big carrier. Lots of auxiliary ships, choppers everywhere, sonobuoys in the water all around us. We were in the middle of a carrier battle group doing exercises, and an attack sub had just used us as a decoy to try to attack. Story 16. I was heading west on Atlantic crossing one time. Coming through the Strait of Gibraltar one night, I was on bridge watch with one other guy. We have to closely monitor our radars in heavy shipping lanes like that. With radar, it constantly tracks targets and whatnot and calculates your CPA. Basically, if you and the other ship maintain the same track, how close your ships will get while passing. I want to say we follow a 1 mile minimum CPA if my memory serves correctly. Well, these ducking guys on a transport ship. I will refer to them as T/V Sleepy from here out. I will refer to my ship as M/Y Large Aqua. About 20-ish miles out, we pick them up on X-band and begin tracking the target. Well, CPA is about 2 miles, so cool, we're good. We had previously picked up another target, another transport vessel. We squeeze the ship and turn to open up 1 CPA and close the CPA to T/V Sleepy, fully expecting them to make a turn because they are essentially on a collision course with other ships behind us. Now we steam around 11 knots, so we've got some time, but we have a large-ass TV Sleepy closing in at around 20 knots. If you know anything about ships, nothing happens quickly until you need it to. Turning takes a long time. Stopping takes a long time. I can't close CPA to the other transport any more than I already had, because it changed course and was moving faster, much larger. Fair enough, we adjusted course. Larger ship has the right of way. We then begin hailing T/V Sleepy on comms. T/V Sleepy, T/V Sleepy. This is M/Y Large Aqua, M/Y large aqua silent. About a minute later again, T/V sleepy, T/V sleepy, M/Y large aqua, please acknowledge. Well, CPA is closing now. They're ducking turning into our track. Dope. T/V sleepy, large aqua, acknowledge. Still, nothing. T/V sleepy, M/Y large aqua, our CPA is now within 1/4 mile. Please acknowledge. I look at the guy I'm on watch with. You think we should wake Cap? No need, we'll be fine. I'm sure they're on a shift change or something, he says. Buddy, I think these ducking guys are sleeping. I pick up the radio and hail Port Authority. Port Authority, MY large. Why, here, I'm not sure if something is wrong with comms, but T/V sleepy won't respond, Port Authority calls back. M/Y large aqua. Acknowledged. We will attempt to hail them. They begin the same thing, getting more and more frustrated. Eventually, they are screaming at them over comms to respond, or they'll be halted and boarded. They finally come back on comms. Port Authority, we hear you. Sorry about that. We had radio issues. The ship starts turning. CPA opening, I call them on radio. T/V sleepy, M/Y large aqua. Welcome back. Thanks for adjusting track. Hope you had a nice nap. Large aqua out. Our CPA ended up being about 550 meters T/V. Sleepy was a 500 M container ship, not even a full ship length niece. They got boarded about 15 minutes later. Story 17. My wife and I were on the boat in the middle of the ocean at night. We were fishing for swordfish, common to do in South Florida. We are 30 miles from land, in the middle of the Gulf Stream. Fishing was horrible, so we start to head in. Off in the distance, I see a massive underwater light coming towards us. Freak me out. The light chased us for a few seconds and went deep into the water. I'll never forget that night. IT was too fast to be a submarine, and we were too far from land for it to be anything but a UFO. I have chills thinking about what the hell it was. Story 18. This happened in 1986. My wife and I were 2 days out of the Azores headed to Newport. We were in our 60s Dutch-built wooden trawler bringing it to the USA. It was green. It was a gorgeous night, quarter moon, gazillions of stars, big pot of dolphins playing in our bow wake, phosphorescent seas all around us, flying fish bouncing off the cabin. Our wake was visible for at least a mile behind us, glowing in the night. That night I had the middle watch. About 0330 I decided that since there were no running lights on the horizon, and we were 200 miles south of the shipping lanes, that it would be okay to turn our running lights off so I could really enjoy the spectacular light show Mother Nature was providing. Even woke the wife up early so she could see the light show outside. About 5 minutes later, an American voice booms over the radio. Will the green fishing boat please turn your lights back on? They didn't answer my question asking who they were. There were no boats visible anywhere. No wakes, no glow. To this day, I don't know who made the broadcast. When the sun came up, there were no ships in sight. 300 plus miles from the nearest piece of dirt, someone was watching us. Big Brother is everywhere. Story 19. Not a sailor, but a graduate of a 4-year international rescue and relief program. Part of the program was an international semester in a developing country and a 2-week survival course in jungle, coast, and open water. We were in Nicaragua/Honduras along the Rio Coco River and moved on to the small islands for the survival training. The jungle and coastal portions sucked, but nothing compared to open water. 5 of us were anchored 100 meters off the coast of Corn Island, right in the surf line, for a few days/nights in a 10-foot open-top dugout boat. By this point in the course, we all were really weak and had lost weight. The sun and constant buffeting of the waves wore us down. We used a tarp to collect rainwater and had pieces of bamboo/surgical tubing for Hawaiian slings. Every time someone had to vomit, we collected it and used it to chum the water around the boat to attract fish. We took turns jumping off the side and trying to spear food, but we sucked at it. But night 2, the storm showed up, and so did the sharks. The wind and waves picked up enough to make us concerned the boat would capsize at any moment. We started feeling a knocking against the boat's hull and began seeing fins right as the sun went down. Some sharks bump and would thrash/fight each other. The boat's line was anchored about 10 feet down to a concrete footing with a metal cable. Needless to say, we became concerned and began questioning our life choices. 2 members wanted to jump ship and try to undo the boat and paddle back to shore. However, we noticed the boat had turned in direction, so the tide was flowing away from land. We could fight the current, but we were so exhausted it would be a gamble. Getting pulled out further from land, with no communication, and after already starving for 2 weeks, would not be ideal. We decided to stay the night. The storm moved off, but every time a lightning strike would go off, we could see the fins. It seemed like more and more showed up every hour, and we felt more and more bumps to the boat. We made it through the night and our instructor came out to get us. Turned out he heard the locals talking over breakfast about a 50-plus group of hammerheads moving through our area over the night. As he pulled up alongside us and was staring at our gaunt faces, a 14-foot hammerhead swam up and tapped his boat. We ended the course there and he bought us lunch. I don't swim anymore. Info: for anyone interested, the course is part of Union College's International Rescue and Relief Bachelor's Program. Phenomenal degree. Story 20. Not really a nighttime thing, but the creepiest thing for me is when you're out there in the ocean, in the water, and you look down. There's nothing below you, maybe for miles, just a black abyss, and then your brain starts to play with you. You start to see things in the abyss, and I'm not talking mermaids or friendly seals. You start to see large monsters down there. Sharks as big as your boat, man-eating whales, whatever. Of course, none of it is real, but Story 21. So I'm a US Navy guy. We were somewhere in the Pacific and it was warm, so I am assuming the Indian Ocean. This was circa 2004. I worked nights and it's supersizing how quiet an aircraft carrier can be at night. On this night, there were no flight operations and about 80% of the crew is asleep. No one even thinking about flying around. The sea wasn't too rough that day. However, I do remember the sound of the random thuds of slightly larger waves. So at about 1 a.m., we decided to cut through the hangar bay to lunch. There were two guys in front of us. I could see them moving in back and forth in a S-type pattern, meaning the ship was rolling gently port to starboard, left to right. As the two guys in front of me snaked toward the open aircraft elevator door, side door about 50 by 40 feet. I could see the top of a wave coming right at us. That wave had just decided to join us in the hangar bay. The bottom of the wave hit with that vibrating thud. The top of the wave sheared off and rolled right into the hangar bay, knocking over the two guys, and as it turned from a wave into a puddle, the wave decided to return to the ocean, sucking the two guys out toward the dark ocean. Fortunately, one sailor stopped short, and the other managed to grab onto the post and wire that loosely guard the elevator door opening. That was 100% sketch. Story 22. Off the coast of Jonesport on a Westmac. Three of us decide to spend the night to get an even earlier start on the lobsters. Quiet night, low winds, the Milky Way a broad band of light across the sky. Around 2, we all awake at the same time because we hear something really, really long slowly see along under the hull. Our beds were about a foot above from whatever it was. We looked at each other in silence. None of us wanted to be a hero and go up to see if there was anything to see. You wouldn't have either, bud. Story 23. When I was in the Coast Guard, we thought we found someone smuggling Cubans, so we launched our small boat and got up all nice and close. Small boat and ship both turned on all the lights and sirens at the same time, and even the spotlight. It was like 3 million candle power or something crazy. Turned out to be some state representative out fishing with kids. Oops, they were cool / understandable. Story 24. While fishing in Alaska, after a late opening, we didn't have enough time to deliver our catch before the tide changed and had to let the boat go dry on the bottom until the next tide brought back enough water so we could get to the offload. We went to bed around 2 a.m. and woke up to the boat rustling about at about 3:30 a.m. The tide wasn't due back that soon, so we knew it wasn't the water. We slowly crawled up and looked out the back door to find a full-grown bear on the back deck. The bear had already thrown a 40 to 50 pounds deck plate off the boat onto the sand and was eating out of one of our fish holds. With the boat only being 32 feet, you can imagine the bear took up about 1/2 to 3/4 of the entire fish deck. Luckily, we were safe in the steel boat, but nevertheless, it was a very close encounter. A different season, during a very low tide, our captain ran straight into the top of a reef and set the boat sideways and sinking. We had to escape overboard and be rescued by the Coast Guard. Luckily, we saved the boat, got hauled out, and were back finishing the same day. As fun as Alaskan fishing is, there are plenty of moments like this every season. Story 25. More weird than sketchy, but squid fishermen. Hundreds of them with white lights in the middle of the night and in the middle of what we thought was nowhere. They were small boats, so we saw the lights well before we saw them on radar. Kind of freaked until we got closer and realized what they were. Story 26. Not a boat or sailor, but back in 2014, I did a lot of IT work on offshore drilling rigs during their final construction phases. Basically, after the rigs went through most of their construction, I would be flown out there for a day or two to get all of the general networking and systems up and running. This included verifying the microwave data link back to shore. Now, this was only about 10 to 20 miles off the CA coast, but it's still as dark as you can imagine out there. It's even quieter than normal because during this phase, there's maybe only 1 or 2 other people on board. Typically, an electrician and a general foreman or similar. Sometimes only one of the two. Anyhow, I was working on a rig about 20 miles out from Long Beach, California. I was going through some rough relationship issues at the time, and wasn't in a great place mentally or emotionally. We didn't have internet on the rig at this point, so I was pretty bored and caught up in my head, so I decided to go take a walk. I ended up on the helipad smoking a cigarette and just looking at the stars. About 2 minutes later, I almost crapped myself or jumped out of my skin. Maybe both. As I was sitting there, a very small Asian man tapped me on my shoulder from behind. He was wearing a high-vis vest and white construction helmet. He asked me for a cigarette and where the closest bathroom was. I gave him one and pointed him in the right direction. Didn't really think twice about it. Walked back down to the living quarters and passed the foreman on the way. Told him about the guy I gave a smoke to, and he stopped walking and immediately turned around. Told me no one else was on this rig but him and I. I ran to the IT closet where they kept their security camera storage appliance, but our PoE switch wasn't installed yet. No video, nothing. We turned on every light source possible on the rig. Did a basic walkthrough but found no one or any traces of anyone. We also contacted our transport company, which also always typically has a search and rescue team available. They flew over 4 SAR and 2 security personnel. They did a walkthrough of the entire rig, every possible inch they claim. Took almost a full day, never turned up. Still get a bit creeped out thinking about it. If given 3 wishes, one of them would be to know who/what that was and where they went. Story 27. U.S. Navy Petty Officer in charge of Low Visibility Watch. Watch, that is called when you are in the middle of the ocean, and there is so much fog, you can't far from the ship. Watches are stationed in different places on a ship to listen, watch, and record any activity. It is to make sure no one sneaks up or we don't run into another ship or boat. Anyway, I had just made my rounds and making sure everyone was in place and awake because it was middle of the night and pitch black. I was just about to check in with Bridgewatch and I get a call over the radio from 2 different watch stations. They reported movement in the water but was unable to see what it was. It sounded like something cutting through the water very fast. I called for the watch officer and I was already at the bridge, so reported it and went to investigate one station while the officer went and checked the other. With us posting at each, we both heard it, but could not see anything. The fog was so dense, you couldn't see the water line. 2 different stations hearing the same thing. LHA is not a small ship. We were all tense. We were thinking the worst. Just then, a break in the fog reveals that there are huge fish swimming around us, feeding on the algae. The algae was luminous, and as the fish would swim through, it looked like hundreds of shooting stars in the water. It was beautiful. Even these words can't describe the beauty. So my report read that it was a huge school of fish. The only people to witness it was the people on the watch. Story 28. This wasn't at night, but as cadet in one of the state maritime ships we left Norfolk. And offshore, we found a capsized sailboat that was getting circled by a few sharks. We called the Coast Guard and went to investigate, and there was nobody on board, so they just assumed it was insurance fraud. Story 29, working in the North Atlantic off the coast of Newfoundland. 33 meters waves in 115 knots of wind is pretty unnerving and very uncomfortable. Story 30, we had a collision with another vessel that had sunk due to running aground. It was towed out by the Coast Guard and left with a lit-up buoy. When we hit it, we were traveling at 14 knots. 1 meter of the sunken hull was above the waterline, and the light they'd attached had run out of battery. New moon, plus midnight, plus improperly disposed of sunken 50-meter motor yacht, with no warning light, equals big crash. Luckily, there was no breach in our hull. A lot of damage though, and we did need to be towed back to Italy from Greece. That summer, we also had an engine room fire underway, the morning of a charter, and one of the portholes in the master cabin broke and flooded the cabin a day before a different charter. Safe to say that was not a fun boat to work on. Story 31. One time, I was helping a guy deliver his 47-foot catamaran from Ecuador to Tahiti. It was the first night out, and there was no wind yet, so we were motoring. I was on watch and saw a lot of lights ahead. I had no idea what they were. This was before AIS, so I turned 45 degrees to the right to avoid whatever it was. The owner comes up and says, "No, go back to our course." So I did. So in a half hour or so, the engine on one side of the boat dies and we're stopping the water. We get our flashlights and see we're tangled in a fishing net. The fishermen come by in their panga. They start yelling at us in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but the owner did and start arguing in Spanish. Next thing I know, the owner grabs a knife and jumps overboard at night and seems to be trying to clear the net. Not mask, no fins, no flashlight. Not a big sea, but a bit of swell, and the boat is rocking around. He could easily get hit in the head by the sail drive and knocked unconscious or get tangled in the net. I run below and get a mask, fins, and underwater flashlight and come back to be ready to assist. Anyway, he survived, but told me later that he did get a bit tangled and thought, this is it. Also, he told me that a few months earlier, he had hit a fishing net when he first arrived in Ecuador. Seems like he was on a mission to hit another net. Kinda strange. Story 32. I could see the lights of a decent-sized ship about a mile away, but when I checked the radar and ship tracker, there was no sign. The radio was being crackly as duck, and it all felt weird. The guy I was on night watch with was half asleep and didn't remember it the next morning. I'll never forget it. Story 33. Don't know if it qualifies, but the scariest thing for me was a couple of years ago in the South China Sea. It was a quiet watch, no other traffic around, no fishermen in an overcast, but barely any wind. I went to the kitchenette to get some tea. When I walked back to my conning station, I glanced towards the bow, just in time to see a flashlight being waved and disappearing behind the bow. I threw me tea to the nearest table, ran to the bridge wing, took over controls, yanked the rudder over, and I saw him again, but with a ship. If the bow goes to port, the sterngoed is starboard. I waited till he was about next to the bow. I then turned to starboard to make sure he'd clear the stern as well. The guy passed right below the bridge wing. I missed him with a few meters. In this area, fishermen are sometimes in tiny little boats made of wood and without propulsion. They will fish alone until they are picked up by their mothership. Usually they have a flashlight or something that burns to alert ships. Story 34. Not a sailor, and wasn't exactly sketch, but it was pretty sweet. I was fishing on Lake Huron for walleye. Pitch dark, and we're just kind of out there chilling when all of a sudden we hear a sizzle and a splash in front of us. We were easily a few hundred yards offshore with no one on shore. The only explanation we could come up with was a tiny meteor came down and splashed down in front of us. Or maybe something fell off a plane. Either way, it was pretty interesting. Story 35. U.S. Navy frigate in the Sea of Japan at night. There are tons of fishing boats out. Many are wooden hulled and don't show up on radar very well. The worst are shrimp boats. They shine huge floodlights into the ocean to get their hulls to come up to the surface where they net them. Navigation can be a nightmare because the fishing boats and their floodlights are white all the way around and you can't see nav lights. Red for port side, green for starboard. So you kind of steer toward the darkness as you patrol. We were moving along pretty slowly in a patrol area, maybe 10 knots, when the forward lookout reported that he saw a shape in the water about 100 feet dead ahead of the ship. I ordered the rudder over hard left and alerted the captain. We rushed to the starboard wing of the bridge and looked down as a small wooden fishing boat passed down the side by about 50 feet. As we passed by, the fisherman on board emerged from his little hut, turned on his one white light and flipped us off for waking him up. Story 36. Not on the sea, but under it. As a sonar technician on submarines, we hear some really crazy crap that sometimes cannot be explained. Several occurrences come to mind when we heard something making a noise that clearly sounded man-made and not biologic, but there would be no other ships even remotely close to us. Story 37. Not a sailor, but a creepy night on the water encounter. It was early October on a lake in New Hampshire. My uncle had a brand new boat and offered to take us all across the lake to a bar. It was my aunt and uncle, myself, and two friends of mine. It's about a half-hour boat ride between the bar and home. We go, have a great time, start to head home about midnight. My uncle grew up on this lake, knows it like the back of his hand, but he also doesn't always make good choices. We realized we were all going to suffer from Uncle's bad choice syndrome when about 5 minutes into the ride home, fog rolled in. Bad fog. Can barely see the bow of the boat fog. And Uncle had neglected to move all his equipment from his old boat to the new boat yet. So, no depth finder, no radio, nothing that would have helped us get home. Having no choice, we tied up to the last buoy we found and prepared to spend the night. Friends and aunt go below, and there was no room for anyone else. So Uncle and I used the boat tarps as blankets and lay down on the bench seats in back of the boat. Creepy part. I doze off and wake up to see this old guy wearing a yellow rain slicker and rowing a small rowboat approaching us out of the fog. It's like 3 a.m. at this point, and we're in the middle of this huge lake, not close to shore at all. Where the duck has this guy come from? I swear all that was missing was a hook for a hand. I shake my uncle awake, and at this point, the guy's like 10 feet away. Uncle calls out, no response. Now the guy is grabbing for the boat. He finally says hello. We say hello. My uncle asks him what he's doing, and after a very long pause, the guy says he's practicing his nighttime fog navigation. My uncle asks him where we are on the lake. Long pause. Guy says he has no idea. Then he lets go of our boat and slowly rowed away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Story 38. Not me, but a former coworker who served in the Navy on the John F. Kennedy. They were in the middle of the Mediterranean, and he was working on the bridge during the night shift. And at around 3 a.m., he said, a large glowing globe rose out of the ocean right in front of the ship. At that moment, they lost power. The entire ship went dead for about 10 minutes. He said the globe rose until it was out of sight, at which time the ship regained power. He was dead serious about this story. This happened in the mid-70s. He told me the story in 1980 in Story 39. On a submarine, going to periscope depth is always nerve-wracking. What sonar holds is usually really accurate, but it relies on ships actually making noise. One night we went to PD on the midwatch, which means the captain was still in his rack and the XO gave the final okay to go up. Came to PD and immediately saw a fishing trawler dead in the water about 150 to 200 yards away. It was by pure chance that we didn't hurt every fisherman on that vessel and do millions of dollars of damage to our submarine. Being underwater is no joke. Story 40. I remember surfacing, but we weren't within sight of land, and it was the dead of night. Submarine mechanic. And when I got up in the sail, it was so quiet, and there was a goddamn fly. Like, what on earth? How the hell is this thing this far from land? I didn't know how close we were. But WTF, dude. Russian spy robot fly for sure. Story 41. This was after we thought we had a man jump overboard, and we had been looking for 2 days now. It's nighttime, everyone is emotionally and physically tired from the deployment. It's silent on the bridge, and we're all just looking out with spotlights, looking for our lost crew member. Honestly, at this point in the search, we know if we find him, it's just going to be his lifeless body bumping up against the hull, so a little bit of you didn't want to find him. As we're searching, I don't know if it was my eyes playing tricks on me or what, but my spotlight caught a yellow entangled mass that looked like a giant sea snake. It had big red eyes that reflected back at me from the light. It was so brief that I don't even know if I was hallucinating or what. Regardless if it was real or not, damn be the person who finds themselves alone, floating out in the open ocean. We found the guy. He was hiding in our engine room. USS Shiloh. Story 42. Somewhere well off the Keys in Gulf of Mexico, on a small sailboat. Had a Piper-looking airplane pass over the boat low and saw it hit the water about a quarter-mile away. He had no lights, and the engine pitch never changed till he hit. Took me an hour to get anyone on the radio, and by the time I circled back to where I thought it went in, there was no sign. Coast High's helicopter showed up to look, and I went on my way back to Key West. Story 43. I spent a week on a tall ship voyage. Weather got pretty rough midway, and all through one night, I could hear the starboard engines going in and out of the water. It was pretty unnerving, though the regular crew were fairly chill, so that helped. Also, I didn't properly stow my bag under my bunk, and all night it kept sliding across the cabin. The deck was pitching so much. Story 44. There was a ship off the Horn of Africa with 70 people on board, which had sunk, and we were responding to the Solace call. We subsequently started looking for bodies/people. Then, during my visual scan, I saw in the F-flyer something warm in the water. It was not moving, so naturally, we sent out a crew in a boat to investigate. It was a garbage bag full of chips from the ship. There were no survivors/bodies found. Story 45, Weather Station Bravo, roughly 5630 North, 50 West, winter, 1970 on USCG Castle Rock. At 3 a.m. took a roll to the upper limit of the ship's righting curve. Another night, also about 3 a.m., we were in drift mode. Only generators and desalinates were running. Something metal and heavy hit the side of the ship at the waterline with a very loud bang. Quick thought was a leftover WWII anti-shipping mine. Dud. Never learned the answer. Story 46. I'm not a sailor at all, but I took a canoe out to a raft and decided to sleep out there one night because it was a beautiful evening and it seemed like a good idea at the time. So this raft is a little thing you moor a boat to, though there wasn't a boat there at the time. It's about 8 feet by 8 feet and water all around. I wake up in the night because I hear breathing. I look over and there's this giant shape in the dark, breathing loudly. It just sits there, watching me, and slowly I clue in that it's a sea lion. It watches me for about 10 minutes, and then just rolls off and vanishes. For a moment, it was a serious moment of panic. That said, sea lions are actually dangerous mother duckers, and there was nowhere to run. Thing could have hurt me if it got it in its mind to do so. Story 47. Well, on an overnight sailing trip, my dad closed all the hatches on the boat, which, for the record, I hated, since it was a cold night and he tried to light a butane stove to make tea and hot chocolate, but then it exploded right beside my face. My bed was beside the table the stove was on, and we were basically trapped in a small sailboat cabin filled with flames. Sucked, but we managed to sort out the issue. I got the hatch open, and my dad managed to throw the stove out of the water. Essentially, we almost died. Mom, dad, sister, and I. But we got lucky. My dad's mattress also got engulfed in flame, which we threw out onto the water. Issue was, it floated. A ferry spotted it and stopped while the Coast Guard nearly got called out for a burning mattress. We heard it on the radio. Essentially, the left side of my head got singed pretty bad, and my dad's hand got burned. Story 48. I remember the sun was setting and it was getting darker, but the moon lit up the sea. I was in the Middle East and the water was calm and looked like glass. I remember looking at the water and all of a sudden a big black and red striped snake was actually swimming in the middle of the ocean. Story 49. Not a sailor, but I went on a night dive and the guide had all of us turn our torches off so we could see the bioluminescent bacteria in the water. It was really dope, until he gave the signal to turn out torches back on. We all did, and then we hear a muffled scream coming from someone in our group because there's a massive barracuda right behind us. I'm talking like 7 feet long and its teeth were huge. It stayed where it was as we moved along, but if we weren't in such a big group, it would have probably hurt one of us. We also saw an enormous sea turtle that swam by a few times. Its tail was longer than my arm easily. It followed us around for most of the dive at a safe distance.